In this episode of First Star Logistics in the Trenches with Dave Lapham, Marty Brennaman and I talk about the Big Red Machine. Everybody has memories and loves the Big Red Machine. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. First Star Logistics presents In the Trenches with Dave Lapham, and joined this morning by the legend, and that's what I call him. It's Legend Brennaman, not Marty Brennaman. It's Legend Brennaman, because this guy, Marty, it's not a Hall of Fame unless you're in it. I mean, how many Hall of Fames are you in, my man?
Yeah, I don't know. 5. So I think 5. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't dwell on that stuff. I tell people, they use the word icon, and I say, you know what the definition of icon is? That you've been around a hell of a long time. That's what that means. Yeah. And but so the halls of fame are nice, and of course I'll add the Reds Hall of Fame hopefully this coming summer. But right. I don't really think about it too much. It's awfully nice that other people remember, but I don't think about it a whole lot.
But what about getting into Cooperstown? I mean, what was that like when you got the word from Cooperstown you were going to be part of the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Well, the funny thing about that was, Dave, that the year before, and I was not supposed to know this. I was told this by someone, and I don't know whether they realized that they were not supposed to tell me or it was a slip up. But prior to my being informed about 2000, I found out the year before I'd missed by one vote.
Wow.
And so, the date slowly comes up that whoever is going to get the nod for the Frick Award would be called on a particular morning. And the day before, Rob Butcher called me, the Reds Media Relations Director, and I don't think we've ever talked about it, but I'm convinced that he had knowledge of the fact that I'd won the award in 2000, and he called and said, the winner of the Frick Award is going to be called tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock by Hall of Fame President Dale Petrosky. And a lot of guys in my position, I'm quoting Rob now, have been informed to call those who possibly could win the award to find out where you're going to be. And he kept emphasizing, and I'm not calling you to tell you you're the guy. And I'm thinking, well, you've already said that a couple of times now. So, right. He said, I said, well, I'm going to be home. I'll be here. And so the next morning comes, and, the clock rolls to 11 o'clock. Now it's 11:01. I said, I guess I'm out of luck. And all of a sudden the phone rings, and I said, hello. And the voice of the other said, Marty Brennaman. I said, yes. And he said, this is Dale Petrosky, president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's all I remembered. I don't remember anything else he said. Wow. Because I know damn well he wasn't calling me to find out how I was doing.
I hear you.
And that's the way it happened. And what made it extra special for me was the fact that Sparky went in the same year, and Tony Perez went in the same year.
Right.
So that it was almost, except for Carlton Fisk, who went in with all of the rest of them. It was an all Reds weekend, and it was really a special. It's even more special when it's like that, and rarely does that ever happen. That you have 2 or more from the same organization go in at the same time, much less 3. Mm-hmm. So it was really special. My mom was there, and my dad had passed away 8 years before, so unfortunately he wasn't there. But it was really something. In fact, we were backstage, and everybody, George Grand was the MC, and they were announcing, Hall of Famer so and so, Stan Musial, Hall of Famer Ted Williams, on the list went on and on and on. And I'm standing back there, and I'm standing between Tom Seaver and Gaylord Perry, and I was on the verge of hyperventilating. Honest to God, when people say, "Well, so and so hyperventilating," I know what the hell they're talking about, because I came within inches of it. And I've never been afraid, and I'm sure you feel the same way. Being in the business that we're in, of being in front of big groups, that doesn't faze us. We're used to that.
Right.
But I was confronted by something that I'd never dealt with before, and had it not been for Seaver and Gaylord Perry calming me down and getting me away from having to breathe into a paper bag to get my act together, I don't know what would have happened. But thank God for both of them, because they got me settled down, and from that point on, I was fine.
Wow. What led you to broadcasting, Marty? Why broadcasting as a profession?
Well, I was not very athletically inclined. I was very small. I wanted to play. I played Little League baseball. And club basketball, and went out for the football team at a very prominent football high school in Virginia as a freshman, and I weighed 94 pounds.
Wow.
Went out as a quarterback, and they had a line coach on the varsity team named Bill Strawn, who later became a dear friend of mine. Long years after I'd gotten out of high school, he has since passed away. But he called me in one day and he said, I got to tell you something. I said, what's that? He said, I admire the fact that you come out here. He said, you're going to get your ass killed. He said, I'm just telling you right now, you are completely overmatched size-wise. He said, you ain't been around long enough for me to determine whether you have a scintilla of ability to play this game. But he said, I think too much of you to allow you to continue to come back out here and end up getting both legs broken and ribs fractured and all. He said, you're not playing anymore. You're done with this. And so I reluctantly turned it in. So I got involved in a lot of activities in high school. I was president of the student body my senior year, and I was heavily into theater, and I carried that onward. I did summer stock work when I was in college, and really had great aspirations of going to New York and trying to break into the professional theater. In fact, I didn't even want to go to college, and my mom and dad put me in touch with a couple of guys working off Broadway, and they were starving to death. And at that point, no pun intended, I realized I ain't got the stomach for this. This is not happening. Mm-hmm. And so the other thing was this. I used to listen to ball games. I'll never forget. We'd go to the beach in the summertime because I lived about 15 miles from the ocean. And I'd sit on the beach and I'd listen to Washington Senators games, and I'd listen to Baltimore Oriole games. And I was just taken by it. But prior to that, I come across one night on the radio, I came across a Brooklyn Dodger broadcast. This was in 1956. I would have been 14. And I was really mesmerized by the guy doing the ball games. Mm-hmm. And I was not a Brooklyn Dodger fan. I was just taken by him and his work. And his name is Nat Albright. And I came to find out and I think that's when the seed was planted, that this is what I want to do for a living. And I think it was subconsciously at that time. Found out years later he was recreating Brooklyn Dodger baseball games from a studio in Arlington, Virginia.
Wow.
And he had gotten permission. It's in a number of books where he contacted the O'Malley family and said, this is what I'd like to do. And God bless them. They were smart enough to realize, okay, we've got Vin Scully and the other people, Connie Desmond, doing Brooklyn Dodger ball games to our fans in New York. But this is a guy who wants to recreate games and pump them into the Southeast. And they felt there was some merit to it because maybe people would become Brooklyn fans and go to New York and watch him play at Ebbets Field. So they gave him permission to do it. And I found out I had no idea what a recreation was. I assumed that, Nat Albright was doing a Brooklyn Dodger game and it was at Ebbets Field in New York when in reality he was in a studio. Wow. And years later, when it was announced that I was going into the Hall of Fame, I tracked him down, and he was still alive, and he was living in Arlington, Virginia. And I I don't even remember where I got the phone number from, but I called him, and I said, you don't know who I am, and I gave him my name. Well, he knew who I was because he knew what I did. He was a fan of the game and guys doing. And he was kind of perplexed that I would call him, and I related the story to him. And I said, it was incumbent upon me to find out where you were, to call you and tell you what a positive impact you had on a decision that I made years later to get into this business.
Wow, that's great.
And I felt like I owed that to you. And he broke down and cried on the telephone.
Really?
Yeah, he was so taken by it, and I think he passed away maybe 9 months later.
Yeah.
And so, I decided to get into the business. I went to a small boys' school in Virginia, Randolph-Macon College, and then transferred to Carolina because Carolina had a great broadcast school, and I got a degree there, and then got into the business, and things kind of took care of themselves, and ended up where I ended up, and I was blessed by God to end up in a city as great as the one we live in.
No doubt about that, Marty, and the city was blessed to have you. So if not broadcasting, what do you think you would have done for a profession? What would have been the next alternative, do you think?
Well, my mother wanted me to go to law school. I had not one single interest in going to law school.
Got it.
As much as I enjoyed college, and nobody embraced college and all the things that college, nobody embraced it better than me, boy.
Gotcha.
I could have been a professional student. I'm not lying to you. In fact, when I went to Carolina, I was married, and both Tom, my son, and my oldest daughter, Dawn, were born at University Hospital in Chapel Hill.
Huh.
And we lived in married housing down there, and we didn't have a pot to pee in. And my first wife, Brenda, she was secretary to the dean of the math department down there, and I was working. I had two jobs and worked, as much as I could while trying to keep up with my studies. But I loved it so much I could have stayed there for the rest of my life. But I sure as hell wasn't going to law school. And by that time, I'd committed to doing what I'm doing now. And but she really wanted me to go to law school. And the great thing about my parents, and I'm sure I'm probably echoing the same sentiment to you and to other people who were fortunate enough to walk the same road that we did. My parents never put any pressure on me to do anything.
Yep.
They may have recommended, but they were never of an ilk to say, well, we want you to do this and we want you to do that. And I knew a lot of guys whose fathers were very successful in whatever field that they went into, and put undue pressure on their sons or daughters to go and walk the same line. And if it worked, it was fine. If it didn't work, for the rest of your life, you had a chance of pointing your finger at your dad and say, well, you're the one that made me get into this business. And that never happened with me. They said, you go off and you do whatever you want to do, and hopefully it'll work out. And it did. And I was forever grateful to both of them that they took the position that they took.
Marty, hearing you do NCAA tournament basketball games, Kentucky games, I mean, your basketball broadcast is equally outstanding as your baseball broadcast. I mean, a guy like you, a wordsmith like yourself, could broadcast anything. You could broadcast a ping pong tournament and make it sound outstanding. I mean, did you ever have any offers to do a big package with basketball or football? Or tell us about opportunities you may have had, but you turned down to stay in Cincinnati with the Cincinnati Reds.
Well, I appreciate the nice things, David. I did some basketball way back in the 70s for a guy named Eddie Einhorn, who, along with Jerry Reinsdorf, ended up owning the Chicago White Sox. And at the time that I came to Cincinnati to replace Al Michaels, Eddie was a big Reds fan. He was a big Red Machine fan, and he became a big Marty Brennaman fan. And he started syndicated basketball on television. He formed a company called TBS, TV Sports. His company was the one that did the UCLA Houston game in the 70s in the Astrodome.
Lou Alcindor and Elvin Hayes, yeah.
Exactly. And Dick Enberg did the game, and it was Eddie's production, and a lot of people give that game credit for really bringing the game of college basketball to the forefront nationally.
Right.
So Eddie was an innovator in a lot of ways, and he became a very good friend of mine, and he I worked for him for a couple of seasons in the mid 70s, I did college basketball, and he really had designs on me moving up and possibly one day doing college basketball at the network level. Or he had no idea that what he was doing would have such an impact on the game, but he kind of took me under his wing. And in fact, had me scheduled to do, I'm trying to remember the two. Providence was one of them, a game that was going to be on national TV. and had me doing the game. And unfortunately, it was after spring training began, and at that time the club under Dick Wagner had a policy that when spring training began, you had to give up anything you were doing in the off season. And so I could very rarely could I take any kind of package back then doing college basketball, because they don't want you for part of it. They either get you for all of it or they get you for none of it.
Right.
And I would have to say to people, well, I can do X number of regular season games, but once I begin spring training, that I'm totally committed to baseball, and I understood that. Most people, it didn't work for them, and I could buy into that. But that's about as close as I ever came. I had a lot of chances to leave Cincinnati and go elsewhere. But every time that I had to pull the trigger, it was always staying where I am. There was a guy, and you remember this name, that owned WLW at one time, Joe Scallon.
Sure.
And all right, well, Joe also owned the station in Boston that had the rights to the Red Sox games.
Mm-hmm.
And one night we were doing, well, it's Hot Stove League now, but it was called Reds Line, and we were doing it from the WLW studios down on, I guess, 3rd, 2nd Street. And I was up there, and he called me in after the show was over and said, I need to talk to you. And so I went in, and he said, I want you to come to Boston to be the voice of the Red Sox.
Wow.
And I was kind of taken aback by it. He said, and I will give you everything there that you don't get here. I mean, if you want to do a full basketball schedule, you can stay away from the radio booth for baseball as long as it takes you to complete the commitment. And he took out a legal pad and wrote out a 5-year contract. The money, which was extremely good then, this was like in 81, 82, somewhere around that. And said, here it is. And he said, if there's something about that you don't like, let me know, and we'll negotiate it to your satisfaction. And I ended up turning him down.
Wow.
I was just happy where I was. In fact, I had the contract that he wrote out under glass hanging in my baseball room in the basement.
Really?
Yeah, I still have it today, and it's as clear as a bell. It itemizes each year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the freedom to do basketball in the season's entirety, et cetera. And I gave some thought to that one. That was one that I really considered. There were others. I met the guy that ran the radio station in San Francisco that had the rights to the Giants games, and I met him at a restaurant downtown San Francisco one day while the Reds were out there. We had lunch, and he said, I want you to come to San Francisco and do the Giants games. And I didn't give a whole lot of thought to that, simply because as I told him, I said, the money is far better than what I'm making now. But I said, at the same time, with the cost of living, I said, I couldn't even afford to buy a house in San Francisco,
right,
even though you're giving me a nice contract. And I said, I'm not going anywhere where I can't afford to buy a house. And that was the end of that. So I got a call one time from it was in the off season, and it was right after a season ended. The phone rang. I asked Marty Brennaman, yes, a woman on the line, and she identified herself, and she said, I've been instructed by Mr. Einhorn to call and see if you'd be interested in becoming the voice of the Chicago White Sox.
Wow. And
I said, ma'am, I'm under contract. I said, the rules of tampering apply to anybody, the player, non-player. If you're under contract with a ball club, she said, we know all that. She said, we know you have a year to go on the contract, but Eddie wanted me to call and see if you'd be interested after next year, after your last year of your contract with the Reds. And I said, I'm very flattered by it, but I said, be sure and tell Eddie. I said, thank you, but I'm happy where I am. And that type of thing. And I look back, once you say no long enough, the word gets out. And then something will come up, and somebody will say, "Well, we got this job. Let's call Marty Brennaman in Cincinnati." And somebody will say, "No, don't bother wasting your time because he ain't leaving there."
Right.
And that was fine with me. After a while, the offers stopped coming in because people realized I wasn't going to leave Cincinnati, and I was happy there. And I never looked back once on any of them and thought what might have been had I taken that job, because I think our business is such a transient business, and so many guys are looking to advance because it's a bigger market than the one that they're working in. And I really think there are a lot of people that never take into account the additional cost of living,
yep,
and all the other things that could create inconveniences because of the size of the city that we don't have to deal with in Cincinnati. I always chuckle when I hear people complain about, God, it took me 10 extra minutes to get to work today because of the traffic. Are you kidding me? Try an hour and a half sometimes in some of these big cities that we travel into.
Yep.
People are spoiled, and so all those things would come home to roost every time I thought about going somewhere else. And thank God I was smart enough to stay where I was.
Marty, you're not just the voice and face of the Reds. You are the Reds to so many people and fans. I mean, how does that make you feel?
Well, it's nice. I know Bob Castellini made the comment the last year. He said, arguably, and I would have said the same, arguably the most important voice in the history of the franchise.
Absolutely.
That stunned me that he said that. But he also made the comment that I hadn't, because I don't count. People have asked me, how many games have you done? I have no idea. But I know some guys in our profession that can tell you to the minute how many games they've done. I could care less about that. Numbers never made a damn bit of difference to me. But he made the comment. He said he's done almost 1/3 of the total number of games the Reds have played in the history of this franchise, going back to 1869. And that meant something to me. That was pretty cool, I thought. But I was fortunate, Dave, because my style obviously is not existent now, because they've watched me retire, and unfortunately, there's never going to be anybody that will be allowed to have the freedom to broadcast a baseball game in that city that I had.
Right.
And that's, you do what you got to do. I mean, you understand what the parameters are for the people that you work for. And God knows I'm the last one to ever be critical of any announcer, because he doesn't have the latitude to be critical at a point in time where a criticism would be justified. I understand that, because they are dealing with people that, and I think this is a sad note to make about our industry. Because in the last 2 or 3 years, 4 years, there have been 2 or 3 NBA announcers who were fired, not because they said anything outlandish.
Yep. And
God knows every now and then I could drop an outlandish on them. But they were fired because they said something that rankled an owner or rankled a club president, and they said, you know what, the hell with this, we're just going to let him go. And I think that's unfortunate, because these guys were talented guys. Today it's a different business. In my case, I was fortunate because even though I'm sure many times I said things that have caused ownership to grit their teeth, that they have allowed me to do my job with the unstated understanding that there's a line beyond which you do not cross. Right. And people have said to me, well, define that line. I said, I can't. I said, inherently, the line if you're around this business long enough. You don't need to put a definition on it. You know where it is. And I think in most cases, I've been smart enough to get right up to that line and back off. And so I was very fortunate in being able to do my job the way I did it, but I don't believe that there'll ever be anybody working at a club level that will have the freedom that I had, and I'm forever thankful for that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about that whole assessment. Your connection with Joe Nuxall, Marty, was pure and it was magical. I had the pleasure of going to a couple of speaking engagements. Remember when the way back rode with you and Joe, and your connection was, I mean, what you heard on the air is exactly what it was off the air. I mean, there was nothing staged about it. It was just pure friendship. I mean, what was it like to have a guy like Joe Nuxhall in the booth with you like that? Dave Lapham here, and every day I am grateful for my experience to have played professional football. As a player, I realized self-motivation, leadership, and appreciating your teammates are key. At First Star Logistics, you can use those same attributes to create the life you want for you and your family. Build your future by working hard like I did. You'll see results both on and off the field. Call First Star Logistics today and be part of our winning team.
Well, I was blessed, Dave, because I know of cases, and I think by virtue of the number of games that are played in baseball, it's much more important than it might be if you're working an NFL game every Sunday, or you're doing a college game, or you're doing 2 basketball games a week. 162 games, and if you work with a guy that you don't like, and you sit down next to him virtually every day to do a game. And I know cases in the past of guys that detested the air that the other guy breathed. And it's unhealthy. It's not good. And I was fortunate to come into a situation in 1974 where Joe just opened his arms and took me in. And he along with Sparky and Pete and Bench and Morgan and Perez, made it as easy for me to slide into that chair once vacated by that it was vacated by Al Michaels, who was very popular in that town.
Sure.
And Joe made an incredibly positive impact upon me from day one. And the only mistake he made was 3 or 4 months after the fact when we got into the 74 season. Sometimes he'd slip up and refer to me as Al. Right. And I would laugh. Right. I thought it was funny as hell. But and the years went by, and we just got closer and closer and closer, and to the point where I could stop a sentence in the middle of it, and he could finish it, and vice versa. And we used to get mail sent to Marty and Joe, Cincinnati, Ohio. No
Wow.
address, no nothing. That's
Wow.
it. And then when I started playing golf back in 1995, I think. It brought us even closer together because we'd get up, we'd be on the road, and we'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning after a night game and go out and play golf, tee off at 7 o'clock, and we'd be back in the hotel by 11 because we'd be the first ones out of the gate. And Joe would have to have his power nap before he went to the ballpark, and we'd have dinner on the road on off nights. It was an incredible marriage. Greg Hord, who was the former sports writer and a very good one in Cincinnati, did a book on Joe, and he had a chapter in there about our relationship, and he referred to us as like an old married couple.
Yeah. And
that basically, that was right. He couldn't have hit the nail on the head any better than he did. So it was special. It was special in every sense of the word. I learned a lot from him. And I look back on everything good that's happened to me in that town since I came, and the one thing that stands out above everything else is a relationship that he and I had as broadcast partners for 31 years.
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. You're a phenom. You come to Cincinnati as a young phenom, and you experienced the Big Red Machine, very early in your career. Once in a lifetime scenario happens, everything comes together so early in your career. What's your best memory of that time frame, Marty?
Well, I think the thing that was, I come into Cincinnati and somebody asked me early on after I arrived there. I came on February 1st, 74. And they said, have you ever been to Cincinnati? And I said, yeah. I said, I changed planes at the airport when I was doing professional basketball in the old ABA. And they said, well, you've never been to Cincinnati then because the airport's in northern Kentucky. I said, well, you're right. And I've never been there. And they said, have you ever seen the Reds play? And I said, yeah. I said, I saw them play at Shea Stadium in New York in 1972, I guess it was. I was doing the Virginia Squires games in the old ABA, and they were in New York to play the New York Mets in a playoff. And I had an off day, and so I took the subway out to Shea Stadium and watched the Reds and the Mets play. And I have very little recollection. I think Bernie Carbo hit a home run that day, and so that was it. And I come in, and I had a somewhat working knowledge of the individuals involved in that team, but at the same time, I was doing AAA baseball with the Mets Farm Club in Norfolk, and I was so wrapped up doing that in the summertime that I would give the Red scores, and Johnny Bench and Bernie Carbo hit home runs last night, blah blah blah.
Right. And
then I get there, and it didn't take me long to realize I was surrounded by a bunch of guys, a number of whom had realistic expectations of one day being in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And then the 74 season starts, and they fall behind early. The Dodgers came out smoking, and they jumped out. I think they had a lead as big as 11.5 or 12.5 games. And the Reds almost caught them in September. They came within 2.5 games of first place and then fell back, and the Dodgers win. And then 75 came, and the thing I most remember early on was how, they were playing before enormous crowds
right.
every night on the road or at Riverfront, and how people would come to see games at Riverfront, and the Reds, on those rare occasions, they might be 3 or 4 runs behind. Going into the 7th inning, nobody would go anywhere. A lot of, most cases you get up and you're 4 or 5 runs down, they're not going to come back. But people were so conditioned to how explosive this club was and how rarely did it ever make a mistake that would beat them, that they would stick around because they felt that sooner or later something would happen and somebody would ignite a comeback and they would end up winning the game. And I also was impressed by the way they dressed. Back then, we all wore coats and ties.
Yep.
My neck breaks out in a rash. So I have to put a tie on today. I mean, I'll run from having to wear a necktie.
I hear you.
But back then, that was the way it was. And we had places in New York where we could go in L.A. to buy clothes at ridiculously cheap prices. And it was all because of the reputation that this club had built up. And when they got off the plane at Logan International Airport in Boston.
Right.
In 1975, to begin the day or two before the World Series got underway. And they got off the plane, and the media people were out there to greet them. The next day, in the Boston paper, there was more written about the way they dressed than about their ability to play the game, because it looked like a fashion show. I mean, everybody tried to outdo everybody else, and it was an incredibly fun time, and for a young guy to get caught up in it in a broadcast perspective, I was along for the ride, and I enjoyed every bit of it. The World Series in '75, and then of course sweeping the Yankees in '76, and I thought you were supposed to win it every year.
Right.
I did, and in 1977, the Phillies had an announcer named Byron Somm, who is also in the broadcasters wing of the Hall of Fame. And the Reds were playing the Phillies, and he came up to me one day and he said, "Marty, you realize how lucky you are?" And rather haughtily, I said, "Well, yeah, I'm still a relatively young guy. I got a big league broadcasting job with one of the great teams at base. I'm not talking about all that." He said, "You get 2 World Series rings." I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "I've been doing Phillies baseball since 1947. And I haven't gotten one yet."
Wow.
Well, back then, I don't know how much of an impact it made upon me until they go from 76 to 90 before they win it again.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed the 90 season more than any season that I ever enjoyed in the 46 years I did it, because I appreciated it more.
Yep. And
I realized how damn tough it is to win a World Series, or in your sport, how tough it must be to win a Super Bowl, and all the things that go into making you a world champion. And so in 1990, I enjoyed it more so than I did any of the 2 previous World Series teams in which I got rings for as a broadcaster. And from that point on, had a much better feel for the sacrifices that players and organizations have to make in order to put you in a position to win a world championship.
That's a very interesting perspective, Marty. Really, it is. You know, the thing about you is you're a great people person, you know, on top of everything else. So your relationships with these players, I mean, you guys had deep friendships. It wasn't just, you know, work relationships. It was like life relationships. And with that said, do you have like a favorite relationship or favorite multiple relationships with some of these guys that you built over the years? Because they looked at you as one of them. I mean, there wasn't any separation there whatsoever.
Well, the two best friends, I'd say the three best friends I've had, four, would be Pete and Joe Morgan.
Yep.
And Doug Flynn and Tommy Hume.
Huh.
In fact, as we conduct this podcast, Amanda and I are down here at our place in Siesta Key, and Tommy Hume and I played golf together yesterday.
Sweet.
He's one of the finest people I've ever known. It just amazes me what a decent human being he is, and his wife Susan, and his kids, and in Pete's case, and Joe, God bless him, God rest his soul, we always maintained a very close relationship. In fact, in Joe's case, he went through all sorts of physical problems, and it was a tough 3 or 4 years for him before he finally passed away a number of weeks ago. And I got a call from, and Pete and I stay in touch all the time, and Joe and I did too, until all of a sudden it seemed to abruptly end. And I would call him, and I'd get his answering machine, and sometimes, and more often than not, the answering machine would be filled,
right,
which would indicate to me that a lot of people have been trying to get in touch with him.
Yep.
And so Pete called me and said, "Have you talked to Joe lately?" I said, "No." I said, "I've tried." He said, "Well, I've tried and tried and tried, and I can't reach him." And I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I will send him a text message." So I sent him a text message, and I said, "Hey, Pete and I just talked. You know how much we love you. We want to hear from you and know that everything is okay. That's all we want, because it's uncharacteristic of you not to get back to either one of us."
Right.
Never heard a word. And then Amanda and I were at the Greenbrier in West Virginia a few weeks ago, and we were playing golf, and I went in the user restroom on the golf course, and I came out, and she said, "I got bad news for you." Mm. And I said, "What?" She said, "Joe's passed away." Mm. And I was shocked. I mean, I had nobody had indication that he was in the shape he was in. And she said, "Your phone is probably going to explode." And I checked my phone, and his wife, Teresa, had tried to call me twice. And so I called her immediately from the golf course, and she heard my voice. She started to cry, and we talked for 15 minutes. And I had everybody in captivity, media people calling it. I didn't call anybody back. Amanda would get on me about not returning calls like that. I said, "Hey, I'm mentally, I'm not in a position to talk to anybody right now.
Yep.
I can't do it." And he was, and Teresa said something. She said, he always loved you so much because you made him laugh. And did we have a good time now.
I bet.
Pete and I had a good time.
Yes, sir.
And I treasure the memories because, I mean, we were out and about now.
Yep.
We didn't miss a thing.
I hear you.
He's the smartest guy that I've ever known in the game of baseball. He could have been a commissioner. He could have been a club owner, a general manager, a manager. He was a great broadcaster. He was just an incredibly bright man.
Yeah.
And it was, I just felt honored and fortunate to be as close as I was to him and also to Pete. I mean, I'm openly tell people I don't give a damn what they think. And I was quoted the other day in the Inquirer about the Baseball Hall of Fame will never be whole unless he's in it.
Mm-hmm.
And my biggest fear is that one day he probably will be, but it will be long after he's passed away, and I think that would be the biggest injustice of all.
Yeah.
I think and Pete's the first one to tell you about all the problems he's had. He's created himself, and he knows that.
Right.
But I think there's a certain level of hypocrisy in the Baseball Hall of Fame, because you can hardly turn around without seeing some exploit of his that enhance the game and its appeal to fans. And they can use that to their advantage, they meaning the Hall of Fame, to entice people to come and see the great accomplishments of guys like Pete and all the guys who were in there. But yet, he's not good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, obviously, he bet on baseball. I buy into it. I know that. Yep. I know that.
Yep.
But I think we're supposed to be in the most forgiving country on earth. And we forgave a president for having sex in the White House, for God's sake.
True.
And so I just think there comes a time when you take stock of things and you say he's paid the price, and we're going to make sure that he's in a place that he deserves to be in. Whether or not that ever happens, I don't know.
Here, Marty. I mean, that Hall of Fame, there's not a whole lot of Boy Scouts in that Hall of Fame. You know, I mean, there's you can find scenarios and stories on a lot of guys that are in the Hall of Fame. But you know, the betting on baseball obviously is the big issue. But I agree with you. I mean, Pete Rose is a Hall of Famer. Period. Yeah. End of sentence. No question. No question.
Well, it's just like it's not only him. There are guys that are not in there that should be. Jim Cox should be in the Hall of Fame.
Sure.
It's almost unconscionable that Jim Cox not in the Baseball Hall of Fame. For me personally, as a fan, it's unconscionable for me that Kenny Anderson is not in the National Football League Hall of Fame.
Agreed, Coach.
I honest to God, I don't get it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And so I know that and the guys would dismiss this, but I know that there were guys that had major angst toward players like Steve Carlton, who would not talk to writers because he felt he was wronged by Bill Conlon, who was a very reputable and respected sports writer in Philadelphia for years. And he wrote something that Steve did not like or was not correct, whatever the case might be. But he made a pact with himself. I'm no longer going to talk to media people.
Yep.
And he was never unfriendly. He was always, you could stand around the batting cage and talk to him. And if anybody walked up with a tape recorder or a pad and pen, he would shut up.
Yep.
But he was never nasty. There were guys that wouldn't vote for him because he wouldn't talk to them. My contention is, if you're going to have a personal negative feeling about a guy because you had a run-in with him, and that's the reason why you're not going to vote for him, even though he deserves to be in there, then you should no longer be allowed to vote.
You should abstain or eliminate yourself. No question. You got a vendetta.
That's exactly right. And if it filters in to ignoring the great things that he did on a baseball diamond or a football field or on a basketball court or a hockey rink, then you should no longer be allowed to vote. And I think there are guys that are still like that today. You know, I don't like that SOB, so I don't care how many times he's on the ballot, I'm not going to vote for him.
Yep.
And I think that's wrong. I really do.
Oh, yeah, they get that big feeling of power, you know. I'm going to control this guy's destiny. You know, yeah, that's a bad mindset right there. There's no question about it.
It sure is. No question.
So, Sparky, I mean, the perfect guy. All the guys you talk about, the Big Red Machine, unbelievable big personalities, tremendous athletes, great players. They had the perfect guy to handle all of it, didn't they, when they chose Sparky? They
did. And I'm always bothered by the fact that you hear it less and less now because time has passed, but there were people who would say, you know, anybody could manage that team. Right. He had so much talent. They could not have been further from the truth. You had incredible egos on that team. There were times, and their relationship has been strained over the years, where Pete and Johnny didn't like each other.
Yep.
And they lockered at opposite ends of the clubhouse, and that was not done by accident. That was done purposefully. But yet both of them were professional enough to once that bell rang every night to play ball, that they were able to put aside whatever personal differences they had and played the game to the best of their ability and played with each other. But he was the guy, Sparky was the guy that was smart enough to know that if I have Bench and I have Rose and I have Morgan and I have Perez and Concepcion in my corner, with any rule that I want to impose upon the club, if they buy into it, then the rest of those guys in that clubhouse are going to buy into it too. You know, they were a team that wore their stirrups the way they're supposed to be worn. Very unattractive, but that was the way they were supposed to wear them. Yep. They all had to wear black shoes. Not attractive, but that was a rule that the organization had. Don't kid yourself. And I've told people all this, that, you know, you give credit to Bob Howsam and Dick Wagner because they imposed these restrictions. But all one player had to do was say, the hell with this. I'm not doing that. And it was over with. But Sparky knew that if I could get the big guys in my corner, that everybody else would fall in line. And that's the way it ended up. And he was smart enough to know that. He was an incredible manipulator of his pitching staff. Mm-hmm. He utilized his bullpen to the nth degree. The starting pitchers did not like him. You know, he had the nickname of Captain Hook.
Sure.
But he had a policy, and he would tell them flat out, if we had the lead in the 6th or the 7th inning, and I come get you, I'm doing it because you pitched so well. I'm going to make sure you may not win the game, but you're not going to lose it.
Yep.
I'm going to put you in a position to win because we have a great bullpen, a bunch of interchangeable parts. And well, back then, Dave, the mindset, that explanation went over the heads of pitchers because then when a guy took the ball every 5th day, he went out with the idea of anything less than getting 27 outs was not good enough. Right. He wanted to pitch a complete game. You never saw pitchers, and I'm not just talking about the Reds, I'm talking about all the other clubs back then. Rarely would you ever see a pitcher look into the dugout if he was in trouble in the 6th inning and trying to protect a 1-run lead. A visual move that would say to the manager, I better go get him. He's looking in here now.
Right.
Sparky had a rule when he went to the mound, don't open your mouth. I'm not interested in you trying to talk me out of staying in the game because you're not going to stay in. The only time I come out there is if somebody's hurt. But other than that, when I come to the mound, I stick my hand out, you put the ball in my hand, you keep your mouth shut, you wait till the relief pitcher gets to the mound, and then you go to the dugout. I'm not interested in engaging in conversation.
Love it.
Well, he had one pitcher, and Jack Billingham is another one of the guys I should have mentioned. Is a dear friend of mine, and he and his wife Jolene have been great friends for Amanda and me. And I talked to him, and I don't think that anybody's a better human being than Jack, but you could even rankle Jack a little bit today if you bring up Sparky, because it still sticks in his craw today. And they had one pitcher, Freddie Norman, who left-hander, stockily built, and as good a competitor as I've ever been around.
Yeah.
And Freddie, he wanted to stay in every game. He did not have any notion about coming out of the game, and he'd see Sparky coming. And he would walk towards second base with a ball in his glove. And he's the only starting pitcher, among Billingham and Gullett and all the rest of them, Gary Nolan, that Sparky would put up with doing this. He would walk towards second base. Sparky would get to the mound. Sparky would patiently wait for Freddie to come back to the mound. Freddie would come back, heads down, put the ball in Sparky's hand, stand there, wait for the relief pitcher, and leave.
Wow.
He was the only one. And Sparky understood Freddie's makeup, and he would cut him that type of slack. But he was just a very, very bright guy, a people person, had a great coaching staff, and listened to him. He utilized his coaches. And I just thought that, when he really proved his mettle when he ended up with the Tigers and won a World Series in 1984 with that team. So he did it with two different ball clubs. So that solidified any question in my mind that anybody could have possibly had about how good a manager he was.
No doubt about it, Marty. He was as good a guy as God's ever created. He's an unbelievable
He
person.
sure was.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
All right, so these days, the legendary Marty Brennaman is not doing Reds games on a daily basis. And you and Amanda, I know, travel quite a bit, have a lot of fun.
Yep.
You're a golfer. I know you're a walker. That's a big part of your regimen is walking. What are those the things that are taking up your time, or what else might be on that list?
No, I think that's pretty much it. You know, we've done a lot of traveling. I was thinking yesterday it'll be 1 year. Well, the year has passed. You know, my last game was the 26th of September in 19, and we all know what a bizarre change in plans every sport and everything has done the virus to affect our lives. But we've traveled. We've thank God I've got my health, and we adhere to the mandates about wearing the mask and social distancing as best we can. And so I've never regretted the decision. Not one time have I ever thought, boy, I'd love to broadcast another baseball game again.
Good for you.
I'm done with that. I mean, I did 46 years of it. I'm done with it. And it really was funny because Vin Scully and I have had a very good relationship. And I'm honored because I think Vinny's a very private guy and he's a very pleasant guy. But he and I talked numerous times after I'd made the announcement. And I think the time, all of a sudden, it made me, I thought one day, you know what, I think he wants to make sure that I made the right decision in my own mind. And so I brought it up on the phone one day. I said, hey, I'm good. I have no regrets. He said, you just are fortunate that you're going out when you're going out because that's when you want to go and you're doing it on your own terms and you're doing it while you're healthy enough to do the things that retired people want to do or look forward to doing when they retire and you don't have any health problems. And I said, no, I can check every one of those boxes as being right. And as a result, I've never looked back. I appreciate the fact that I have a business relationship with the club for a few years to make appearances and do things commercials and such as that they might want me to do. But I have no plans on ever broadcasting another baseball game again. And so I'm fortunate because I know a lot of people have retired in whatever walk of life they were in, and they look back on it a few months after the fact and said, I made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. I called it at the right time, and I've been very, very happy with the decision and very happy with the things that we've been able to do since I've retired.
Well, Marty, a rich career, no question about it, as good as anybody, amongst the best that has ever done it, in my estimation. I mean, you are incredibly gifted and talented, and the city of Cincinnati was so blessed to have you for all the years that we did, and I appreciate you carving time to sit down with me. I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, because I know I learned something. Hopefully everybody else did as well. And the legend, Marty Brennaman, joined us on First Star Logistics in the Trenches with myself, Dave Lapham, and look forward to doing it again sometime, Marty, here in the near future.
Thank you, David. You and I have been friends for a long time. We've had a lot of laughs together, and I really appreciate the time that you've devoted to me. Thanks, pal.